As French police and the army sweep Paris suburbs for a criminal ringleader, Russia and France intensify strikes against the Islamic State in Syria. Pope Francis travels to Africa. How will his progressive views be received by more conservative Catholics on the continent? And some uninvited guests crash the G20 and become international sensations. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent Makori. This is Africa 54. Tonight, the hunt for the Paris attacks masterminds is still ongoing, but a police raid in a Paris suburb ended after 7 hours Wednesday, with 2 people dead and 7 arrested. The police raids began overnight with sounds of heavy gunfire near an apartment in Saint-Denis. At one point after dawn, police could be seen leading away a man wearing only underclothes, but no statements regarding arrests were made at that time. A government spokeswoman announced around midday the raid was over. Authorities say they were seeking Abdelhamid Aboud, a Belgian national of Moroccan descent, but did not immediately confirm if he was at the site. The Paris prosecutor's office issued a statement saying the dead included a woman who blew herself up. Officials say 3 police officers were injured and a police dog was killed during the operation. Authorities are also looking for other suspects tied to the November 13th attacks that killed 129 people and injured more than 300 others. Now, for the latest developments in France, VOA's Arash Rabasadi joins me live via Skype from Paris. Arash, welcome, and please tell us what is the latest in Paris tonight?
Hi, Vincent. I wish I was coming to you with better news. As the world knows by now, this morning there was a raid that was carried out in a suburb of Paris. When we got there, it was kind of what we would expect of any major global news story. You had dozens of reporters, and we saw, the whole area was kind of blocked off, and all the media was positioned at a church that was in the suburb. And there was a point where they brought in the French equivalent of a SWAT team, and they broke down doors of the church because what we were hearing was that it wasn't secured. So there's no way of knowing actually what was inside. So there was a kind of a moment of tension where they literally ripped the doors off of an old church.
Now we know that Parisians have been trying to get back to normal. How has this impacted their lives, their day-to-day activities?
Tremendously. Last night we went to a live jazz show. And we actually finished the story that we submitted yesterday with that. And the whole point of that was that Parisians were getting back to their normal lives. And then this happens overnight. So it's kind of, people were kind of getting used to being comfortable again, to being Parisians again, to going to the cafes again and walking the streets. And then all of a sudden, this happens. And so the tension there, I would say, was high because you have military personnel, you have police out there, you have the rifles and the submachine guns. And, for anybody living in the Western world, this is not typical of what you would expect to see outside of your apartment, let alone down the street from where you live.
Now, inevitably, this has brought to the fore the discussion about migrants and refugees, and particularly those from Syria. What are they saying themselves? What are people saying in Paris?
Well, it's a mixed bag. The neighborhood where we were earlier today, remember this happened for us overnight, that community is actually, we're told by our local help here, that it's a very Muslim-heavy neighborhood. So it's kind of, that's where you would kind of expect to find the mosques and the Muslim community. But throughout the rest of Paris, which is a lot unlike this neighborhood, we haven't seen anything, we haven't heard anything other than while we're sitting in a cafe talking with someone getting information, we see perhaps a Muslim man walking by with his head covered, and someone tells us that guy's going to have a difficult time going forward.
Arash, thank you very much for your reporting. Thanks a lot.
Always a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you. Arash Rabasadi of Voice of America reporting live via Skype from Paris. Now, top security and intelligence officials are warning the deadly attacks in Paris claimed by the Islamic State terror group are likely not a one-off event, and fear of more plots in the pipeline is again putting the spotlight on the problem of foreign fighters returning from the battlegrounds of Syria. VOA's national security correspondent Jeff Selden reports.
With wounds still raw from Paris and much of Europe on edge, there's the question that won't go away. have more foreign fighters returned to the West to wreak havoc in the name of the group known as Islamic State. In Europe, the challenge is great.
You have far greater numbers of people who have gone over to Syria, greater numbers of people have returned, and more developed jihadist networks that they're drawing upon.
Experts say there's not one single psychological profile for who's likely to become a foreign fighter, let alone come back as part of a sleeper cell. What is known, the average male Western foreign fighter is 25, the typical female 21. 1/3 were active in online jihadist forums, and more than 80% have joined Islamic State.
The attraction is not as much as it was at the beginning. For sure, we're seeing this through intelligence, but they may be still attracting some people.
U.S. intelligence officials worry that attraction is still substantial, and combined with Islamic State's flexibility, could help the group pull off more attacks in the West. And there's precedence. The brothers who carried out the Charlie Hebdo shootings in Paris in January had ties to al-Qaeda, but were also connected to Ahmedi Koulibaly, who died in a shootout at a French grocery store, having pledged himself to Islamic State. Jeff Selden, VOA News, Washington.
Well, Russia and France have intensified their airstrikes in Syria in the wake of Paris attacks and the bombing of a Russian airliner over Egypt. VOA Pentagon correspondent Carla Babb looks at how the increased efforts will affect the fight on the ground.
Russia and coalition member France have stepped up strikes over Islamic State's stronghold Raqqa, punishing the group for targeting their citizens in recent attacks. Earlier Russian strikes wreaked havoc on Syrian opposition areas, away from Islamic State strongholds. But the Pentagon is cautiously optimistic about Russia's shift.
It does seem that, at least in recent days, there's been more of a focus on ISIL, and we welcome that.
The question remains, can more firepower prevent Islamic State attacks? Andrew Tabler of the Washington Institute for Near East Policy says no.
I think that France and a lot of other countries will step up their efforts, but you can't bomb your way out of this problem.
Critics of the president's strategy point to the attacks as a warning that the U.S. plan in Syria is not working.
There is no compelling reason to believe that anything we're doing will be sufficient to destroy ISIL.
This president does not want to commit ground forces to Syria. Of course, it begs the question, what ground force is going to go into eastern Syria anytime soon and root out ISIS? And for the life of me, I can't find one.
But as the fight on the ground ramps up, the administration says local forces, not the Russians, French, or Americans, must be the ones to push the terror group out of Syria. Carla Babb, VOA News, the Pentagon.
Well, the discovery that one of the suicide bombers who attacked Paris last Friday was carrying a Syrian passport and had apparently arrived in the shores of Greece last month has intensified the already heated debate over the migrant influx into Europe. As in regional reports from London, the attacks have spurred rightist parties in Europe to renew calls for pulling out of the EU migrant resettlement deal.
A terrorist masquerading as a refugee. French prosecutors confirmed Monday that Ahmad al-Mohamed was among the attackers who blew himself up at the French National Soccer Stadium in Paris. His Syrian passport, believed to be a forgery, was found near the body. Al-Mohamed's fingerprints matched a set taken by Greek officials on the island of Liros in October as a group of about 70 migrants came ashore. The leader of France's far-right National Front Party, expected to poll strongly in upcoming regional elections, was quick to react.
La dissémination de ces migrants dans les villages, dans les villes.
The spread of these migrants in the villages and towns of France could prompt fears of the existence of terrorists who take advantage of these population movements to come and strike us not only in the heart of the capital, but in other French towns.
In Poland, the newly elected Conservative Law and Justice Party warned it might pull out of a European deal on the resettlement of refugees.
We'll accept them only if we have security guarantees. This is a key condition, and today a question mark has been put next to it all around Europe.
Brussels has warned against conflating the terror threat with Europe's migrant crisis.
Die fliehen vor dem gleichen dramatischen Terror, den wir jetzt erleben.
To blame them would mean to call the victims the perpetrators, and that is the last thing we should do.
Und das ist nun das allerletzte, was wir tun dürfen.
Analysts caution that most of the attackers in Paris were European citizens.
If ISIS really wants to carry out attacks in the West, they don't need to import terrorism through refugees. They can recruit from within our own societies.
Human rights group Amnesty International warned against a knee-jerk reaction.
What we need now is leadership in keeping us safe without harming, violating the human rights of those who need protection as well. The irony, of course, is that people who are being blamed for this are fleeing the exact same type of terrorism, violence and horrors at home.
Security analysts say ISIS likely intended the attacks to exploit tensions over migration in Europe. Henry Ridgewell for VOA News, London.
U.S. President Barack Obama has criticized American politicians for opposing the resettlement of Syrian refugees, saying their rhetoric is contrary to American values and could become a recruitment tool for the Islamic State militant group. Since the terrorist attacks in Paris, some Republican politicians have called for a halt to all resettlements of Syrian refugees, arguing those steps would prevent Syrian terrorists from carrying out similar attacks on the United States. Tuesday, U.S. House Speaker Paul Ryan called for a pause in the U.S. acceptance of Syrian refugees.
Our nation has always been welcoming, but we cannot let terrorists take advantage of our compassion. This is a moment where it's better to be safe than to be sorry. So we think the prudent, the responsible things take a pause in this particular aspect of this refugee program in order to verify that terrorists are not trying to infiltrate the refugee population.
Speaking to reporters Wednesday at the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit in Manila, Obama said under the current U.S. process for vetting refugees, it already takes months for refugees to enter the country. He said to stop the process would amount to acting out of fear.
We are not well served when, in response to a terrorist attack, we descend into fear and panic. We don't make good decisions if it's based on hysteria or an exaggeration of risks.
The president had a strong reaction to suggestions the U.S. only allow in Christian refugees from Syria, saying it is offensive and contrary to American values.
ISIL seeks to exploit the idea that there is a war between Islam and the West. And when you start seeing individuals in positions of responsibility suggesting that Christians are more worthy of protection than Muslims are in a war-torn land, that feeds the ISIL narrative.
Republican lawmakers have called for a halt to plans to resettle an additional 10,000 Syrians in the United States in a debate that has mirrored discussions in European countries over whether resettlements endanger security. Well, the United Nations has urged European countries not to react to Friday's attacks in Paris by rejecting or blaming refugees. For more of the plea for refugees, William Spindler, a spokesman for UNHCR, joins us live now via Skype from Geneva. Mr. Spindler, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you.
Now, we have heard some voices here and there, but do you get the sense, really, that government could in some way refuse to take in refugees because of the events of Paris?
Well, we understand that there's serious concerns about public safety and security, and rightly so, after the horrific attacks in Paris. But we are of the opinion that the best way to avoid security problems is to, first of all, improve reception, registration and screening of the people who are arriving in Europe. This is what we have been advocating for We need to have a process in which people who are arriving in Europe looking for protection, who are fleeing persecution, who are fleeing for their lives, who are in fact escaping in many cases the very people who committed the atrocities in Paris, find that protection in Europe, but through organized, safe, legal ways. What we would like is more resettlement. We would like more relocation of people who are already in countries such as Greece and Italy, and more possibilities for people to come safely into Europe. That would increase the safety of the refugees, because they would not need to take these dangerous journeys. They would travel with visas on planes and arrive in places where they would be received, and the authorities would be ready to receive them. But it would also, of course, increase the security of the countries receiving them, because they would know exactly who's coming.
How much of a challenge is this to the UNHCR, being that you're the people who actually, in many cases, receive the refugees at first?
Well, at the moment, what we have is people arriving by their own means, and they are arriving at the moment at the rate of about 4,000 or 5,000 a day into the Greek islands, and then making their way through the Balkans into Central and Northern Europe. We would like people to continue to be received, but proper screening and registration of those who arrive. We would like also legal ways to be established, so that eventually people would not come that way, but they would come in an organized way. This is, of course, a huge challenge, because what we need is more cooperation between European countries. So far, there hasn't been a coordinated response. Different countries have different policies, and that has contributed to the chaotic situation that we have at the moment. We would like more organized, safer movements of people. People will come anyway. Those who are escaping for their lives will continue to come, and Europe needs to receive them. But this needs to be done in an organized way.
Mr. Spindler, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
William Spindler is a spokesman for the UNHCR. Now, we asked our followers on Facebook, how has terrorism changed their life? Martin Nyalusi from Tanzania says, let's look at Kenya, Garissa and Westgate. They caused deaths, fear and economic decline, but I think there are some people who sponsor these things for their own interest. Abera Akilu from Ethiopia said, corrupt and undemocratic governments create terrorists. In the future, Africa will be full of terrorists. Terrorism is a bad act, but most population is exploited by few individuals. Now, I want to thank you very much for your responses, and keep them coming. Go to Facebook, the address is Africa54, and tell me how terrorism has affected your life, or send me a tweet at VOA Vince Makori. Coming up, Kenya prepares to receive Pope Francis. Stay with us.
Health news and notes. This is Living Better.
Loud snoring is not just a problem for those who hear it. Snoring can cause sleep apnea and serious health effects for the snorer. While simple lifestyle changes can help, a San Francisco company has a more high-tech solution for snorers called Smart Nora. It's a bedside monitor that senses when snoring begins and wirelessly activates a pump to inflate a mat beneath the snorer's pillow, altering his head position. Beruz Hariri is co-founder of Smart Nora.
Nora is actually listening for volumes of snoring that are below the sensitivity of their partner. So just before snoring is getting loud enough to wake them up, Nora does the gentle push or the gentle movement.
The Mayo Clinic says about half of adults snore and suggests some simple snoring solutions such as losing weight, sleeping on your side, and avoiding alcohol before bedtime. I'm Martin Seacrest for VOA's Living Better.
Welcome back. Now, in Nigeria, a blast struck a fruit and vegetable market in the northeastern city of Yola Tuesday evening, killing 32 people and wounding 80 others. There was no immediate claim of responsibility, but the blast bore the hallmarks of militant Islamic group Boko Haram, which has killed thousands over the last 6 years in its bid to create a state adhering to strict Sharia law in the northeast. Suspected members of Boko Haram have killed around 1,000 people since President Muhammadu Buhari took office in May, vowing to crush the militant group. President Barack Obama has called on Burundi's leaders to take part in talks to end the country's political crisis and halt a growing wave of violence. The president spoke in a video message addressed to the people of Burundi. Mr. Obama says the killings of innocent people and hateful rhetoric from leaders is jeopardizing the Central African country's future. He urged the government to halt the rhetoric and engage in an internationally mediated dialogue outside the country. The president also appealed to Burundians to stand against violence and work toward unity.
After civil war and strife, you've worked to rebuild. You've seen the possibility of a better, more peaceful future. Don't let political rivalry or the voices of hate take that away from you. You are one people, and now's the time to stand against violence and to begin the hard work of uniting. The future of your country, the future you want for your children, is in your hands. Murakoze Chane.
Well, political violence in Burundi has killed an estimated 240 people this year and sent more than 200,000 fleeing across the borders, with the bulk going to Rwanda. Well, the excitement is building as Pope Francis prepares to travel to Kenya on November 25th to kick off his first Africa tour. Since becoming Pope in March 2013, the pontiff has been shaking up the church with his progressive views on everything from homosexuality to divorce. VOA's Jill Craig visited a Nairobi church to see how the Pope's less traditional views are being received.
Churchgoers here at Nairobi's Holy Family Minor Basilica may seem just a bit more joyful this Sunday as they prepare for the arrival of a special visitor to their country.
Actually, we are waiting a message of hope from Pope, from how he conducts himself. I think he will bring a good impact and a positive attitude to people, and we should embrace what he is bringing to Kenyans because he's our role model.
Pope Francis is seen as more progressive than his predecessors. The question is how those views will resonate with Africans during his first visit to the continent. In the past decade, Kenya has seen breakaway orders of Catholic priests who decided to get married. Pope Francis has not condoned this, but he has reportedly said the Vatican is looking into the question of married priests. Adenaide Tendwa doesn't believe that priests should be allowed to get married.
Because it's better for someone leading others spiritually being single, just the way he is. You know, if you say he's going to get married, some things will come in. He needs to take care of the family. He has stress of the family, the wife, and everything. I think spiritually it will affect.
Samuel Gitau agrees.
When they marry, I feel they not be able to concentrate in the church affairs. Yeah.
Pope Francis has said he wants to see a greater role for women in Catholicism, but remains against ordaining women priests. Josephine Kivuva agrees.
Because the men are the ones who have been priests up till now, and they have done pretty a good job. And also, I think the disciples that Jesus chose when he was here on earth, they were all men, particularly maybe for a reason, for us to take as an example.
But Rogers Mwendwa says women should get the opportunity too.
Yes, because in the kingdom of God, even women should have some part to play.
It is on the topic of homosexuality that Pope Francis may diverge the most with church members in Africa. While the Pope says marriage should remain an institution between a man and a woman, he has not categorically ruled out civil unions. And he has urged love and mercy for gay people, saying who is he to judge them? But homosexuality is illegal under Kenyan law, and at least some church members are also against it.
Homosexuality shouldn't be there, because at the first, in the book, in the Bible we read, we need to get married and bring up children. Now when you bring homosexuality, that one will not be having a family.
Nevertheless, Catholics here say they are ready to set differences of opinion aside.
When the Pope gives us direction, we need to follow it according to the tradition of the Church.
Pope Francis is scheduled to arrive in Nairobi November 25th. Jill Craig, VOA News, Nairobi.
Well, it's time now for a short break. Still to come on Africa 54. Surprise guests steal the show at the G20 Summit. We'll be right back.
If you've just joined us, I'm Mariama Diallo, and here is a quick recap of today's headlines.
In Nigeria, a blast kills 32 and injures 80 at a market in Yola. We stay in Nigeria, where after these deadly attacks, Facebook activates a safety check to allow users to mark themselves as safe in disaster situations. In Guinea, Doctors Without Borders continue to treat a 3-week-old girl as she recovers from the Ebola virus, the last remaining case in the country. In Egypt, at celebration marking 113th anniversary of the Egyptian Museum, Antiquities Minister calls for global cooperation in the war on terrorism.
That's all for today. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Welcome back to Africa 54. Here's what's trending. 3 stray cats have stolen the spotlight from world leaders gathered in Turkey, evading tight security to take the main stage at the G20 summit in Antalya. The group of cats managed to break through the security lines and tiptoe out onto the stage just before world leaders were due to appear there. Turkey is known for its large population of stray cats. And last year, the country's energy minister blamed a power cut during election day on a cat who had walked into a power distribution unit. Of course, the video of this catastrophe has gone viral on social media. Well, next up, 40 years of performer David Bowie is chronicled in a photography exhibition in New York City. The Japanese photographer Masayoshi Soketo shares dozens of his pictures spanning Bowie's dazzling, colorful career. Soketo began photographing Bowie after seeing him in concert in 1972. After a show in New York, the exhibition will head to Japan, then onto Italy. Well, and finally, Canadian scientists are researching how to marshal a lot of tiny drones to create a virtual image you can touch and see without having to wear a mask and gloves. The team says they hope the technology will eventually bring virtual reality to life in the real world. Each bit drone, as they are called, will be a pixel or dot of color marking a whole 3D image. To create the effect they want, the Canadian team needs to shrink these drones down to less than a millimeter in diameter. Virtual reality is already used to develop surgical skills in the medical profession and could be taken much further, and that is what's trending today. And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. Thanks a lot for watching, and we look forward to seeing you again tomorrow. Have a good night.
Through you, we become more informed. We can better perform because sometimes you are the critics. Sometimes you bring the info, allowing us to be critics. So it's you have become a part of our life, and we need you to continue growing.
Music is something that brings people together.
Music educates, it motivates, it's a bridge.
Music. Ali.
On
VOA.
I am Sheikh Sali, host and senior editor of VOA's international call-in talk show, Straight Talk Africa. The issues that we discuss are pertinent to most people on the African continent.